I'm going to talk a little about the potential of sorghum from a genetic perspective, but also from the perspective of the economics of the crop and what makes it worth growing for the farmer. So in my role in Australia, it's very important that I understand the whole value chain, and I see that this is a great possibility of this meeting is to build those linkages between the elements of the value chain in Europe, which are something that I've taken for granted in Australia. So, as a plant breeder, it's actually very important to be able to predict the future, because the things that you do today only end up as products within 5 or 10 years. So we're talking about 5 years, 6 years between making a cross and developing a variety, maybe more than that. If you're working where I am in pre-breeding, we're talking 10, 15 years. So you need to think about what will happen in the future. So global trends are important, and these are a few of the ones that I think of when I think of sorghum. One is the demand for meat and milk, but particularly pork and poultry. The other one is foods for health, so the trend for foods that have a functional value, so the gluten-free, the ancient grains, low GI, high anthocyanins and antioxidants.
Sorry, what does GI stand for?
Glycemic index, so for less likelihood of getting diabetes. Oh, sorry. So even the terms are so common that I...
Just to clarify.
In English, anyway. And also this competition for water resources between agriculture and domestic environmental and industrial uses. And then we have on top of that climate change. The climate's getting hotter and drier. So a lot of those trends are favourable for sorghum. So we've heard so much about the flexibility of sorghum. It's one of the most, if not the most, diverse and adaptable crops available. And potentially that has been a problem for it. The variation in traits like flowering time is enormous, so from somewhere around 40 days to flower to over 100, heights from 30 centimetres to over 6 metres, or over 5 metres. It's got great genetic potential. The genome is small and easy to work with as a plant breeder. The opportunities for biotechnology are also enhanced by this. And substantial gains in productivity can be achieved by investment in breeding. So there are lots of opportunities, many options, probably too many options. But I'll point to a few that I think are important. Sorghum as a bulk feed. This is the primary use of sorghum. We heard it mentioned previously. As a grain, it's highly substitutable. So in Australia, there is very little difference in the price of corn and sorghum or wheat, because people can substitute one grain for another in feed grain. So if you're talking about sorghum as an animal feed, then it needs to be economically competitive as an animal feed. But there's this rising demand for feed grains all over the world. And so even if Europe is not exporting, Europe's opportunity to import grains will be under pressure. So it's great to be producing a product that the demand is increasing for. And it's very competitive as a crop in conditions where the environment doesn't favour maize. So maize is very hard to beat where maize is favoured, but if resources are limited or stress is high, then sorghum is better. And we see that in Australia. It's a much dominant crop because of that. So the idea of sorghum as a forage or an agro-industrial crop, it's important part of the makeup of the crop. The water efficiency is important. Again, this competition with maize is important. Again, there are lots of opportunities to exploit in breeding that we haven't looked at to the extent that is possible, particularly in terms of optimising the crop as an animal feed. That's really important. There are also growing demand for industrial fibres and bioproducts. but they tend to be a little bit more risky because almost anything that you can do in sorghum you could potentially do with maize. And one of the things about agro-industrial crops is the need for consistent supply. And sorghum tends to be grown in environments that are more variable, and that variability makes it more difficult to supply. So sorghum is a food or specialty ingredient. It's certainly an area that has had a lot of interest of late, and I see it as important, but only at a small scale. It's very hard to see large quantities of sorghum being eaten by people. However, there is the opportunity for a number of, specialty products. But again, it's important to think about how a crop like sorghum can maintain a comparative advantage over other grains. So is there a value capture mechanism? How can you share the extra value that you get from this grain across the value chain? So is it worth it for the farmer to grow it? Is it worth it for the seed company to produce it? So, and consistently meeting market demand. So the competition's there. One of the advantages of being a small crop is the potential to focus on an area like this, whereas that may not be something that a larger crop can do. So there's a possibility there. Finally, the constraints of sorghum, commercial sorghum breeding, which is important. And I think at this meeting it was clear that there are lots of opportunities, perhaps too many opportunities. The market size in Europe is relatively small, and the potential growth is, it's there, but it won't be the world's largest sorghum market. So there's a need for focus to understand what the targets are. So what environments are experienced? What types of products are you going to produce? And for who? So the thing with hybrid seed production is it's expensive and it's hard to produce large numbers of different types of products. It's just economically unprofitable for the companies. So there's a need to focus on the products that are going to be the most important. So some of those things I mentioned earlier, that's important. So market size, production costs, they all drive what products commercial companies can provide to farmers. The other element, my last piece, is that the major seed companies really lack the technical, not really the technical capacity, but compared to a crop like maize, technical ability is less available. There's less money for it, really. It's not that the technical capacity is not there, but the money to do that technical change is not available. And for that reason, the public sector is more important. And certainly in a country like Australia, but also in the US, the public sector plays a bigger role in sorghum than it would do in maize. But the challenge is to have a funding arrangement that drives that collaboration. So scientists usually want to work on things that are interesting and publishable, and certainly you can do that with this more applied research, but often it's important to build funding mechanisms that encourage farmers to work, researchers to work on problems that are interesting to farmers. And at least in Australia, one of the methods that this has been achieved has been by a funding mechanism where farmers actually contribute to research funds and drive the research agenda.
And this is your case, actually. Your research is funded that way.
Yeah, so probably 50% of my research funds come from that method.
So I hear a lot potential, opportunity. So the dreams are here, but where is the reality?
Yeah. So I would say that the important thing is focus. So there's too many opportunities. So you need to look at where money is to be made. Yeah. And use that to focus, where the opportunity is.
So involving farmers, funding research or being active, taking part in research themselves is one way. Earlier we talked about public-private partnerships. That may be another way also.
Yes, I think so. And I think really understanding the economics of the system is important for the researcher and for the the farmers, because farmers often demand things that are impossible, but are not aware of things that might be possible. And so that conversation between the farmer and the researcher is really useful, because often things that may be possible are beyond people's thinking or experience.
So if I understand well, the problem is the market size right now. It's not very big, so who would want to invest a lot of money in a market size that is small?
Exactly.
So if we take the problem by this end, the size of the market, then the idea would be to first maybe increase the size of the market, and then that would be a driver to make more research in this direction.
So we have the saying, which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
So to drive the increase in market size without demand is difficult. Mm-hmm. So unless you have some sort of external funding, which may be possible in the EU. However, I would still say focusing on elements of the system that are profitable is really the way to go. So at least where animal feeds are concerned, a lot of the inputs are in place and the pathways are in place. It sounds like there is a need for education of the feed industry. However, I would say it is the easiest opportunity.
I was also curious, the nutritional traits that you mentioned, they were more for the food sector than the feed sector. But in fact, nutrition for feed is also very important.
Sure.
Are there some traits, some characteristics of sorghum that could be enhanced or worked by geneticists to meet some specific demands from market segments in the feed industry?
Yeah, and this is an area of opportunity, but also a challenge as well, because at least our experience in Australia is that feed companies are trying to produce the lowest cost diet, and so they substitute different ingredients. There would be a possibility to greatly improve the value of sorghum as a feed by conventional breeding or by techniques like gene editing. But the challenge with doing that is that typically the farmer will not get any more money. So who pays for that research? And it's been very hard in Australia to get the feed companies to pay for that research, because they say, well we'll just get maize or wheat or something, and we don't want to pay more. I think if a partnership was made, because at least for industries like the chicken industry, very small changes in feed conversion efficiency are worth a lot of money. So if it were feasible to produce a better quality feed that would allow a chicken to leave the shed a day earlier, that is worth a lot of money. But working out the systems to allow that value to flow or to be shared with the farmer is really the challenge. Biology isn't the challenge, the economics is the challenge.